I mean, for me, it's the long game of how they come after the rest of us. I had decided quite early on that I will not participate in this in any way. I've always been able to combine those two things of humour and emotion in what I do.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly suited to what's happening now, and it seems to be what so many people need.
Okay. Wish me luck.
Oh, well, thank you. Please be gentle. This is very much a case of the hunter becomes the prey.
Well,
there are probably quite a few people who will watch this thinking, go on, be really horrible. Be as harsh as you can be.
Well, that's the thing with what I do. It's almost the opposite, because I sort of naturally flatter people, I think. I'm quite short-sighted, so I tend to have a kind of dynasty, Joan Collins.
That's great.
Smeared screen anyway. And it just naturally sort of goes like that. You tend to ignore some of the marks, because you can sort of look over.
But of course, this is sort of the interesting thing about cartoons and when cartoons first arrived, because if you go back, all most people saw of their leaders, their rulers, their kings, politicians, whatever, were portraits in galleries that were obviously commissioned to flatter them. And then suddenly they had these really grotesque, offensive depictions of these people who, until then, had just been painted as sort of demigods almost.
So that's your job.
That's my job, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your job to start off with, if you would like to, just a little summary. I think most people will know quite a bit about you, probably, if they're watching.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to ask, after you've sort of given a little summary, is just how that transition. I think you described it as. How did you describe it? As sort of letting go of the old world, sort of moving into that process of shifting your perspective. It's quite a sudden shift, wasn't it?
Yes.
Relatively.
Yeah, it was.
So if you give us a little overview of your work at the Telegraph, and then what changed.
Okay, so I've always loved drawing. I always loved drawing cartoons. I always drew to make people laugh, and then I kind of spent my childhood drawing my parents and my teachers.
Yeah.
And it was definitely that thing of being critical of authority figures, but not really with any specific political bent. I didn't have any philosophies, really. I wasn't a very political person, not from a very political family. It was just a very broad thing about, this is a great way of puncturing the egos of people who give us rules,
Yeah. Did you always feel like a rebel? Were you sort of sensitive to the hypocrisy of the adult world?
I was, yeah. I was always aware of authority that was clearly just for authority's sake, rules that didn't really make sense. And I always found it fascinating, once you start drawing cartoons of people, the different ways they're received. Some people absolutely love it and they can see themselves straight away.
Yeah.
And other people really don't like it. Because it's not how they see themselves, or it's not how they try to be seen.
Yeah.
So I always really enjoyed that.
Did you enjoy seeing people squirm? Was there a bit of a power?
Well, it was funny because obviously when I was at school and I used to draw teachers or sometimes other pupils, often the plan would not be that they would end up seeing it. It would be for the entertainment of my peers, and it was how I made a lot of friends. But inevitably, someone grabs it and passes it to the front of the class.
Yeah.
So the teacher sees it, and then that's when you'd get the different reactions where they either stick it up on the board or you get a detention.
Yeah.
And then obviously when I was about 14, I started to hear about this job that you can do where you do cartoons for a newspaper, drawing politicians. And I thought, well, that sounds like exactly what I'm supposed to do. It's obviously a very niche thing that there's no set path to get into. So I went and did an illustration degree, and I found the one course where they would let you do political stuff. And I just, I think while I was at university, I got to know a lot of the other cartoonists who were already working, you know, Guardian and Times and Telegraph. I'd come up to London with my portfolio and find them in a pub or at an awards thing. And
yeah, was that off your own bat?
Yeah, and I entered while I was still at uni. I think yes, because I understood how unlikely it was to actually get a job, because there aren't many people with the weird skill set to do it. There aren't that many jobs that exist for a major paper. It's like there's probably 15 people in the country at any one time who do it regularly. So, and also once people have a job like that, they tend to stay until they're in their mid-80s. Yeah. And either die at their desk or eventually get booted out. Yeah, yeah. So, I sort of spent, after I graduated, I spent 3 or 4 years working in pubs and hotels, and I spent all my spare time drawing cartoons and just sending them to editors, magazines and newspapers. And I rarely got any response. And eventually this job came up at the Telegraph, and one of the other cartoonists had put in a word for me, you know, saying, "Oh, you should give this guy a try." And I got called in, and that was in 2011. And I sort of started out just doing a couple a week, or it might have even been a couple every fortnight for them. And I stayed there for 10 years, and I kind of worked my way up to being their main political cartoonist. Built up a really good rapport with the readership, and I was sort of winning awards, and it was all great. So I was very happy, and obviously I'd accomplished everything I had ever wanted, really. I'm at the Telegraph, and eventually they gave me an employment contract, so I had, you know, a proper salary and paid holiday and all these things that someone like me nowadays would never really get. You shouldn't, you know, it's pretty unlikely. Yeah. And I'm totally immersed in the mainstream media machine. And I was obviously aware from early on about the fact that it's not entirely the way the public perceive it, as in, you know, what you read in a newspaper is not whatever the journalists know is happening in the world and they feel the public needs to know. Yeah. There's loads of kind of processes of filtration and things they hold back or things they deliberately don't put in the paper because journalists have relationships with, you know, politicians. Maybe they went to school with them, or perhaps they're just having lunch with them next week, or maybe they want the politician to write a piece for the paper so they're not going to criticise what they're doing this week. There's all kinds of things like that, and you just sort of accept it and you think, well, I suppose that makes sense. And I guess I believed that stuff happened within certain boundaries. So up to a point, there's this kind of slight deception, but I believed it wouldn't be allowed to go too far. You know? Right.
Was the part of you that felt uncomfortable? Did you just almost not listen to that voice?
I think when I started, I was only 25. I was pretty naive, and I had so much to learn about how a paper worked, and about I wasn't really ready when I started. I basically had to spend the first couple of years learning on the job. Yeah. It's not something you can prepare for, in that you can't really simulate being in a paper with a deadline, having all these different news stories, working with different editors. You've got to just go in and do it. So this idea of what is this machine I'm in, you know, how much does the truth matter? Yeah. Do I agree with this story? That didn't bother me as much to begin with, because I'm just thinking, you know, how do I do this in 6 hours? Right, okay. What do I want to make it look like? You know, how do I cope with, a lot of the time, you might get an idea approved and you'll be halfway through and then a new story will break and someone will come and say, right, put that in the bin, start again.
Yeah.
You've got 2 hours to do something new. And you have to experience all of that, and that's pretty much all you're focused on. And my style completely shifted in those first few years from when I started to what I'm doing now is kind of similar to probably what I was doing from about 4 years into working at the Telegraph. But all that stuff I should have done at university when I was sort of busy having fun.
Yeah.
What paper am I using? What paints?
Yeah, okay.
All
practical
that
skills,
practical
yeah.
stuff. I didn't really learn until I was actually working at the paper.
Yeah, well, we can get onto the education system and
yeah,
the agenda behind that. Yeah.
So it wasn't really, I suppose, until 2020 when all the madness started to happen with the announcement of the lockdowns and this idea we were in a pandemic, I began to feel really uncomfortable. Not with my position at the paper necessarily, but just it felt very different to everything I'd covered before in terms of how journalists were responding and how the politicians were responding.
Right.
And it felt like that idea I'd had of, well, these people have never let it get too far. You know, if the idea I had was, well, if the politicians ever went really rogue and started imposing tyranny and actually harming people, these journalists are going to hold them to account.
Yeah.
And they just weren't.
Yeah.
And nothing about it seemed to fit with the way I'd seen other stories unfold. In that, you know, so often you see politicians announce something or go down a certain path and they get pushed back, or it's obviously not going to work, or new information comes to light. And they always find a way of wriggling out of it. You know, they'll always find a way of stopping it or U-turning without too many consequences. And I got quite good at spotting those opportunities when they come up. Oh, this is going to allow them to drop this or distract people with something else.
Sure.
So for the first few weeks, I really assumed that would have to happen with this pandemic nonsense of announcing these lockdowns and shutting down the economy, and then you have all this information coming to light almost on a daily basis that this is not the deadly emergency that we were told at the beginning. So that all these reasons for any leader to stand up and go, oh, whoops, that was close, you know, we almost imposed communist tyranny there, but don't worry.
Yeah.
Back to normal. And they weren't taking any of those opportunities. And then you realise none of them are anywhere else in the world. None of the journalists are asking them why not. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what's going on here? Obviously, we were all told at the beginning, you know, if you don't have a science degree, if you're not an expert in viruses, you basically have no right to have an opinion on this.
Yeah.
You shouldn't say anything.
Yeah.
We just got to listen to the scientists. And then I quickly understood that this whole issue was way beyond politics or science. It was a moral issue. This basically was about the nature of how we live our lives and how we interact with each other and the values we have. And that, again, was all getting missed. There weren't any journalists asking those ethical questions about what was being done. So I thought, well, I'm going to start trying to address some of this in my cartoons. I suppose I went through this early phase of, while I was figuring it out personally, being a bit cautious and just making light of how silly everything was.
Yeah.
The nature of the rules.
Yeah.
You know, police drones chasing dog walkers, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Not coming out and being overtly opposed to the whole thing or saying, look, this is all a lie. We shouldn't be doing it. I suppose because you want to be sure. You know, I thought this is not something I want to get wrong.
Were you, at that stage, were you sort of aware of these crazy conspiracy theorists who were...
No.
Okay, so this was more of a sort of just a gut, something that you arrived at yourself.
I think this is really important, and it's something that we sometimes forget as whatever you want to call us, Awake People, Freedom Movement, whatever.
Yeah.
Just people who were opposed to this.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were loads of people out there who were into conspiracies for their whole lives and who say they always knew this was coming, and as soon as it started, they knew what it was.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030.
Yeah.
They knew that there would be jabs and they'd be dangerous. And what was happening early on was anyone who had a problem with this was being labelled as a conspiracy theorist, as an anti-vaxxer, anti-science, COVID denier, or whatever. And this idea came into play that the only reason anyone would be against what was happening was if they didn't believe there was a virus. They didn't believe there was any emergency.
Right.
And what that's not how I came to it at all.
Sure.
You know, and I try and stress now that the realization I came to was that it didn't actually matter how real it was. You could have the deadliest pandemic you wanted. You could have billions and billions of people going to die.
Yeah.
You can't justify the state not only removing the rights of citizens in this way, but actively killing them, imposing policies that are going to take life just because you have some vague idea that it might save some other people.
Yeah.
That's trading lives. That's just unethical. You can't do it, ever. And you can't agree to it. You set a precedent then for tyranny. You're no longer in a democracy when that happens. So...
And now do you look back and think that the debate was shifted there on purpose to you know, avoid people talking about these fundamental human rights issues?
That's obviously why none of that was addressed in any press conference. It's why no journalist was... Because I can remember in that weird phase before we went into lockdown in kind of late February, early March, when they'd announced a pandemic. And I can remember mainstream journalists like Laura Kuenssberg or Robert Peston talking about what they were doing in China and saying, you know, China are welding people into their apartments and they're having this thing called a lockdown.
Yeah.
And they were asking the question then, you know, what will Western democracies do? Because obviously that is not an option for our politicians because we're not communist China. So they're going to have to come up with another plan. That lasted for about a week. And then Boris Johnson says, no, we're going to do lockdowns as well. And not one of those journalists turned around and said, hang on, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Because democratic governments can't do that to their people.
Yeah.
That was obviously intentional. They obviously got a memo. Don't remind people that this is not what the state can do to you.
Yeah.
So obviously, as this argument was so clear to me, I thought it ought to be so obvious that this was wrong, regardless of what the truth was about the situation we were in and the threat we were facing, that lots of people would see it and there'd be so much pushback that this couldn't possibly last more than a few weeks, you know. And of course, they sold it to us like that. They said it was only going to be for 3 weeks anyway.
Yeah.
Once we passed that stage and they said, oh, you know, actually it wasn't 3 weeks to flatten the curve, it's going to be at least 6 months where you're all locked up.
Yeah.
I thought, well, now it's really important to stress these ethical, moral issues and the way our fundamental values are just being trashed here. So I started to bring that more into my work, and the paper were fine with it. I had some discussions, and I said to the editors, listen, for me, this is not really a debate about the science or what the virus is going to do or what the pressure on the health service might be. This is entirely a moral thing. And they agreed with that, and they said, well, that's fine, we're happy for you to address that in your cartoons. And I realised I loved working with those themes. I really liked the fact that I wasn't dealing with left-right politics anymore.
Yeah.
These boring political stories that basically are fairly inconsequential.
Yeah.
This is about how we live, how we value freedom, how we value, you know, prioritise children or not, as was suddenly happening. And I really loved using my skills and my style and doing cartoons about that stuff, which I hadn't really expected. And it was popular with the readers. They liked it. It did get quite strange because obviously at that time, the newspapers' revenue, most of their revenue was gone. A lot of their money was coming from advertising, for holidays. All of that was gone.
Oh, right, yeah, sure.
The government then came along and said, listen, we'll give you millions and millions of pounds if you carry our ads for whatever it was, wear a mask, download the NHS app, stay in your homes, protect the NHS. So I'm creating these cartoons to sit in the middle of a paper, pretty much surrounded by government propaganda. And that did get quite strange. But I was sort of building up a bigger audience, and I was starting to get attention from people who didn't read the Telegraph, and hadn't seen my stuff before, because nobody else who does what I do was calling this stuff out or showing any opposition to it at all, which I was really shocked by at first, especially because I'm unusual in the sense that I'm not really political. I wouldn't describe myself as conservative or anything.
Yeah.
But most political cartoonists are quite heavily left-leaning people.
Yeah.
Who'd always hated the Tories.
Yeah.
And they used to mock me when I got the job at the Telegraph. They go, what's it like just churning out Tory propaganda every day?
Yeah.
And I'd laugh, and because I started out doing a bit of work for the Morning Star, and then I did a brief stint at the Guardian, and then I went to the Telegraph, and they'd say, the only place left is the Daily Mail. But they were then suddenly churning out all the Tory propaganda, and I was the only one who was trying to counter it.
Yeah.
Which was bizarre.
One of many ironies during the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah. Now I did start to get some ideas refused, things that I thought were really important. I suppose they were basically the more overtly sentimental ones about family or elderly people that you could argue were not technically cartoons in that they're not designed to be funny.
Okay.
I started to try and do pictures to just move people, to kind of really focus on their emotions, because I could see that none of the facts were working, and people were really getting frustrated trying to point out all these facts. Yeah. No one was listening. So I kind of thought, well, let's try emotion. Let's try and remind people that grandparents being ripped apart from their grandchildren is a horrible thing that the state can't do.
Yeah.
The paper started to reject those ideas, but they were saying either that they were too emotional, kind of naff, I suppose, soppy, or that they were encouraging people to break the rules, which they couldn't do. So I started to just do some of these cartoons in my free time, on my days off or over the weekend, and just post them on social media. Uh-huh. And they were immediately more popular than anything I was doing for the paper, and were getting shared more widely, and they were attracting this bigger audience. Mm-hmm.
Was that a revelation that had you thought about? Had you used kind of Twitter and
no
that much before?
Before then, I'd not really been on social media at all. All I would do is, after I'd filed my cartoon for the paper, I'd just stick it on Twitter, and with no comment. I would never write anything on Twitter. I wouldn't, create threads about anything or give my opinion. Yeah. My opinion was my cartoon. Yeah. And that's essentially sanctioned by the paper. And I only had about 4,000 followers, I think. And then suddenly I became quite active, and I'm sort of using it to post this stuff the paper doesn't want. And I started to build up quite a big following. And then it was this strange Peter Hitchens thing happened, where Peter Hitchens suddenly starts sharing my work a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I was aware from early on that he was one of the only high-profile mainstream voices who was saying this was all wrong.
Yeah.
And he actually helped me clarify a lot of my thoughts in the early weeks.
And personally, were you having conversations with him about what was going on? Or?
Not initially, and then we did start corresponding.
Yeah.
Because he really gave me such a boost. As soon as he started sharing my work, I was getting all these new followers.
Yeah.
And I was very grateful for that. And I wrote him a few letters. I thought, Peter Hitchens is the kind of guy who'd really like a handwritten letter. So I wrote to him, and he wrote back, and he sent me a copy of his book. And it was great. Then obviously, as has happened in a lot of cases, I think he reached a certain point where he wasn't prepared to go any further. For whatever reason, once we got to the jabs. And if you look back at Peter Hitchens' career, he has done this quite a lot, where he will campaign against something and then basically declare defeat, say, this is over, we've lost, forget it. And he'll move on to something else.
So someone outside who didn't know him personally might, especially in our slightly often paranoid conspiratorial mindset, might jump to the conclusion that therefore he's a controlled opposition who's creating a sense of defeat, and that we
this
can't
whole
do
idea
anything.
of controlled opposition is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I don't doubt that there is such a thing. I'm sure there are people who've been planted and who are given instructions to steer people this way and that, and to make sure that those of us who are against things or are opposed to it are just maybe distracted or given wrong information, or put out the wrong things at the wrong time. But I think that the number of those people is very small.
Yeah.
And I think when you think about it, lots of characters can be controlled without knowing they're controlled. And certainly anyone with a high-paid, high-profile, mainstream position wants to keep it. And if they've been around for a long time, somebody like Peter Hitchens, you know how far they're going to go with something. You know what they're prepared to say and what they're not prepared to say.
Yeah.
And often, all you have to do to control somebody is you pick someone who's taking a position you see as useful, as in, this person is not going to go beyond this point. They're not going to go too far. They're not going to make people aware of X, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. You just promote them. You make sure that lots of people see what they're doing.
Yeah.
If they want a book deal, you make sure they get a book deal. If they want to go on television, you make sure they always get to go on television.
Yeah.
And their ego is what controls them. Their desire to protect their position is what controls them.
Yeah.
You don't need to phone them up. Yeah. You don't have to call them up every week on a Monday and say, here's what we want you to tweet about, here's what we want you to say. I think there's an awful lot more of that going on that gets mistaken for controlled opposition, in the sense that this is some deep state agent.
Yeah.
So
I'm totally in agreement with that. And I find it slightly frustrating how easily people jump to that conclusion in the movement.
Yeah.
It does smack of paranoia. And I sort of get it, because, people don't want to be fooled again.
Yeah, I understand it, yeah.
And they want, and also there's a sense of ego in a lot of people. I think they want to be the cleverest conspiracy theorists. Like,
yeah, exactly.
They want to go as far as they can. And they want to be the one to call out.
Yeah.
You still think so-and-so's
That's
legit,
right. And they want to be first. They want to be the first. But I said this before anyone realised. Yeah. There's a lot of competition in that sense.
And that's something we can talk about as well in a bit. Just the whole psychology of the truther movement, or the awake movement.
Well, I suppose that I kind of realised this through my own experience of being who I was and the position I was in. I understood at a certain point how useful I would have been if I had just capitulated and promoted the jabs, for example. I'm in this position. How old was I? 34, 35, 3 young children, mortgage to pay. It's taken me 15 years to get this job that I really can't afford to lose.
Yeah.
They've allowed me to have this freedom. I've suddenly built up this popularity, all these new fans, winning awards, and then the jabs come along towards the end of 2020, and there's this massive tonal shift of, okay, we're backing the government now. We're not going to keep banging on about how bad the lockdowns are. This is a great thing, and we want you to celebrate the fact that these injections have arrived. And at first I'm thinking, well, we're all still locked down though. So, I mean, it's still going on.
Yeah.
And I'm obviously really skeptical about the jabs. And as I pointed out to them, listen, everything they've done so far has been experimental, immoral, illogical, and really dangerous. Why should we assume these would not be the same?
Yeah.
We can't trust these people anymore, and also we don't need it, and so all the kind of basic reasons.
Yeah.
And I also said, I'm a satirist. Now, I appreciate that I have been straying slightly outside of my lane in the sense that I'm doing these rather emotional things about family and that are not really political at all.
Yeah.
But certainly it's not part of my remit to promote medical procedures. That's a really weird thing. It's going to look really odd to have a cartoon. Why would you have a cartoon about people going and getting an injection for anything? But there was so much pressure, and I understood how useful I would have been to the agenda, if you want to call it that, if I had just in that moment gone, you know what, okay, I can sense that I'm putting my job at risk if I don't do this. I'll just churn out a few
the equivalent of that
cartoons.
Stephen Colbert vaccine dance. Did you ever see that?
Yes.
That kind of thing you could have done your equivalent.
That type of thing was what I was being pressured to draw almost every day at one point. And I wasn't going to do it, and partly what cemented it for me was my godmother died in the February, early in 2021, after the AstraZeneca jab.
Right, okay.
She was my mother's best friend, and I just thought, there's no way that I'm going to promote this stuff.
Is that one of the reasons why your family have been on? You haven't had conflict with your family, have you?
Well, I've got two brothers, and my mum and dad. We were all basically in agreement from the beginning. I was very lucky in that sense.
Yeah, that's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd have conversations with my brothers early on, most evenings, about why it was all so mad and wrong, and that was really helpful for me. So no, we were all we were never going to get injected. I mean, part of the thing initially with the injections was I had decided quite early on that I will not participate in this in any way. I won't do anything to help this thing along. From a kind of, if you like, a spiritual point of view, I didn't want to look back and think, oh, I complied with any of it. Anyway, I was... Oh yeah, the controlled opposition thing. I think I just understood at that point that had I agreed to do a few pro-jab cartoons, there wouldn't really have been any way back from that. I could have no longer carried on criticising stuff or trying to be a voice of reason or morality after that point. Yeah. And basically I would then have been controlled opposition in that sense without ever being explicitly told.
Without getting the financial benefits.
No, exactly. Or without actually being instructed beyond the way a cartoonist is steered by an editor to, why don't you do something on this? So I do understand that now. I do appreciate how I would have been a useful tool for the state had I done that. And of course, again, all my colleagues at other papers were doing exactly those pro-jab cartoons or attacking people who were against them. And I even ended up in a Guardian cartoon at one point.
Oh, okay.
along with other, supposedly dangerous characters.
Who else was in it?
There was Toby Young and
Really?
Jonathan Sumption.
Okay.
Who else was there? I can't remember that. I was very small.
Yeah.
I wasn't really supposed to be noticed, but I did spot
They
myself.
know how to target certain kind of class, cultural. They know what appeals to certain people, and they know how to shame people, I think, as well, into compliance, don't they? That sort of so and so believes this, therefore you would be an absolute tool to this, and the public shaming and everything. So
you don't want to associate yourself with this person.
Yeah.
And I was starting to get these sort of subtle threats, I suppose, where I was being told things like, listen, you've done so much great work on lockdowns.
Yeah.
And you built up this big audience. It would be a real shame if you threw it all away by being labelled an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
That's what they said to me. And I started to think, right, okay, so that sounds like a threat. I'm also aware that being a pro-vaxxer is going to throw all of that away.
Yeah.
Everything I've done up till now won't really mean anything.
Yeah.
I did do a couple of cartoons because it was a really difficult negotiation. You always have negotiation with editors. You're not, the way things work at the Telegraph is it's collaboration. You are not free to just draw what you like and file it at 6 o'clock and they print it. You have to clear an idea or a theme, you have to sketch it out, it has to be approved. And then you go away and finish it. Sometimes after you file it, they'll ask for a few changes. They might want you to make some edits to the words or whatever. Anyway, I did end up in these back and forths about, come on, do a pro-vaccine cartoon. No, I don't want to. Well, there's nothing else going on today. And at the beginning, I did settle on, well, all right, I'll comment on the fact that it's slow. They're being really slow to get it out. Obviously, I'm really glad that it's slow.
Yeah.
They sort of compromised and said, can't you just do something about how slow it is? So I did do a couple of cartoons that obviously I really regret doing now. I mean, aside from anything else, because they weren't very good.
Yeah, of course.
Because you're never going to do, when you're under duress and you don't want to do the thing, you don't agree with it, it's always going to be a crap cartoon.
Naff, isn't it? Yeah.
So I did do a couple at the beginning of 2021. And I was kind of saved in the sense that our third baby was born at the end of January. And the Telegraph had this fantastic paternity leave thing where you could have 6 months paid paternity leave.
Yeah. Some things about woke are all right, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought I'm definitely going to take advantage of this, and this is just the right time for me to be having some time off and not being under this pressure. So I then went off and obviously didn't do anything for a few weeks, had my baby and managed, all that happened without me having to put a mask on, which was great. It was actually really funny because I was in an operating theatre for sort of 3 hours because it was an elective cesarean, not wearing a mask. And I talked about this the other day. I actually, during the cesarean, they nicked something by mistake and I actually got splattered with blood on my face, And I think one of the nurses did make a joke about, oh, I bet you wish you had a mask on.
Yeah.
And then I remember on the way back from the hospital, later in the day, I stopped at a supermarket or something, went in to grab something and immediately got told by this spotty teenager to put a mask on, which it really made me laugh. Mm-hmm. I said, I've just spent all day in an operating theatre not wearing one.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was great. And during that time off, obviously, I start to feel a bit itchy. If you don't draw or paint for a while, you start to get that feeling of, I need to do it.
Yeah.
And obviously the jab rollout is happening, and the absolute disaster of this is becoming more and more apparent. You're hearing about more people dying or having heart attacks every single day, and again, no one else is doing anything about it. in a creative sense,
Yeah.
not drawing about it. So I just started doing some of my own ideas and putting them out while I was on leave, and those were that's when I suppose that was a turning point when my work starts to become a lot harsher, and so I start doing slightly more aggressive, gratuitous stuff, more overtly anti-vaccine stuff, knowing that this could get me into a lot of trouble and everything. But I thought, I thought if I don't do it, no one else is going to, so I have to try.
Yeah. Is it something that you discussed with your family? Like, this might mean. Just.
Yeah, I think I did have conversations with my wife and maybe my brothers about the fact that I think I've just got to go all out and say what I think.
Yeah.
And whatever happens, whatever the consequences are, because this is too important. And it's that I had started to realise, maybe this is why I always had this weird talent, why I draw the way I do, and why I've always been able to combine those two things of humour and emotion in what I do.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly suited to what's happening now, and it seems to be what so many people need. So you think, this is not the time to be half-arsed about things, I want to try and see how far I can take this. I had started to learn that cartooning and visual satire can have a big impact in situations like this. So I thought, I want to see how far I can push it, and so I those cartoons I did while I was off on leave got massive traction and attracted way more people, and one in particular I did, which was Stand Firm. That's lots of people have probably seen, with the demon holding a syringe.
Yeah.
Which again, technically, maybe not a cartoon.
Very
it's
moving.
More like a horror movie poster or something.
Yeah.
And that was done so quickly. The idea just came into my head fully formed. Okay. I didn't sketch it out or anything. I just did it in about an hour and a half.
Okay. Just out of interest, on more of a technical level, what reference material do you tend to use, or is it mostly imagination? Or
it varies a bit. Sometimes with something like that, where the image is almost fully formed in my mind, I won't use any reference at all. I'll just let it come out.
That's pretty impressive.
But it doesn't always work like that.
No, of course not.
Like, sometimes I'll get stuck on it. If it's an awkward pose I want to draw, I'll use a reference photo.
Sure.
We were talking before about hands, how difficult hands are. A lot of the time I have to find a picture of a hand holding something in a particular way.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't want to make myself out to never need reference material. That's not true. But for that one, I didn't use anything. And
did you study anatomy? Did you do lots of life drawing and study anatomy and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we did life drawing every Thursday.
Yeah.
For the whole time.
Yeah.
Which I loved.
Yeah.
And I always struggled, obviously, not to let it stray into caricature and not to exaggerate.
Yeah, sure.
And my favourite.
Not quite appropriate with nudes.
Yeah. But, my favourite models were always the kind of portly middle-aged men with crazy hair and stubble and strange, knobbly knees and all of that stuff. But I think that was really important. It's really important discipline, and it's really key to, you'll know this, but understanding that so much of it is about learning how to look at something.
Yeah.
And understanding how to channel that information from your eyes down into your hands.
Yeah.
So, as I'm sure you would have done, you have to do lots of drawings where you don't look at the paper. until you've finished, or doing it with your left hand, or even doing it with your eyes closed or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's really useful because it never ends up looking like what you've drawn.
Sure.
But there'll always be one or two lines where you think, oh, that line is great. You know, and I'm not sure I would have been able to draw that line if I'd been looking at it.
It's slightly distracting because I'm interested in some of the kind of technical details.
It's really nice to talk to another artist about this stuff.
I don't know how many other people find it interesting. No, I'm sure they will. You were talking about the cartoon with the syringe.
Yes. That had a big impact on lots of people, and it kind of started to get shared all around North America and Canada and Australia, various places. It's quite funny because it's my most well-known piece, probably, that's had the most impact. And it wasn't a conscious thing. Well, I suppose it was, in the sense that it's a very dark picture that's got a very instantaneous message, and I didn't want to kind of spoil it by scrawling my signature in an obvious way.
Right.
So my signature on that is really subtle. It's really hard to see my signature. It's kind of in faint grey up one side.
Okay.
And as a result, it got shared, and loads of people didn't know who'd done it.
Didn't know.
Which is probably a lesson, you know, some higher power is teaching me a lesson about ego there. It's sort of the most recognised thing you do, no one will know it was you. Which is good. But I'm very, I still hear stories from people about how they saw that and they didn't give the injections to their children. And
well, good on you. Someone's whole life could go by and not have that kind of positive impact on the world.
Yeah, and outside of myself and my own kind of sense of accomplishment, I just find that incredible. That someone can just make some marks on a piece of paper in an hour and a half, and it can make that kind of impact, change somebody's life in that way. It's important. That's why we've got to stop this war on creativity that's going on.
Yeah. And there is a war on creativity.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a war on beauty, and I don't know if this is the right time to butt in, but when I was at art college, I ended up doing a year where we did life drawing at a place called Bourneville in Birmingham, which was like a Cadbury's village.
Oh yeah.
And that was traditional art. And then I went to Brighton and we did conceptual art. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought, oh, that's good, you can do a bit of video in this. 3 years of just having been absolute. Well, the first red flag should have been the Marxist theory of art.
Yeah.
It's like, well, wasn't Marx like some, what's that got to do with art? But I try to fit in, perhaps in a similar way. You sort of get sucked into these kind of environment, and you look up to these older. We had a Marxist history of art teacher.
Yeah.
Oh, he's Marxist, is he? All right. So was he living?
Yeah.
What do you mean? He gives his money away or something? No, he's just.
No, they never do that.
No, of course they don't. But you try and make sense of it as a sort of young man.
Yeah. And you think, oh, I must have missed something.
You think I missed something.
Because I'm young and naive and I don't understand this yet.
Yeah, that's it. You do. And I tried to fit in and I played the game and I did all right because, but, that whole 3 years was, I saw people fall away who I sort of looked down on in a way. I thought, well, you don't get it. You're not getting it. You're not smart enough to get what's going on.
Okay.
They were the smart ones because they were sensing, their spidey sense of this is all bullshit.
Yeah.
This is just like, Emperor's New Clothes crap, just waffling and it's all.
Yeah.
And so people who are creative and they want to, we couldn't talk about beauty or truth.
No.
You just couldn't. It's all the sign and the signifier and all this kind of conceptual, philosophical nonsense.
If you want to learn colour theory or how to paint or technical stuff, no way. Probably the tutors don't even know. They couldn't teach you if they wanted to. No. I
don't know if it would have been slightly different in the painting course, but even then they were doing using the same kind of, theoretical nonsense.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. There is a war on. It's funny actually. I just got a message yesterday I've got friends who took part in the Sky Portrait Artist of the Year competition, and the producer got in touch saying, you know, if you apply, you know, we'll definitely look at your application. And I was like, oh, that's quite nice that he's actually you know, messaged me personally. That very night was the final of the Sky Portrait Artist of the Year. And so I haven't got a telly, so I couldn't watch it, but it came up on Instagram. So I was seeing who'd won it, and I was following one artist who's, I mean, you know, fantastic. Like in 4 hours. I saw it. I said, no way, you can't have done that in 4 hours. It's just a beautiful portrait. She got all the way to the final, and they showed the winning portrait by this guy, early 20s maybe, good looking, queer, LGBTQ thing.
Box ticker.
Ticked all the boxes. You know, he looked great. You know, the portrait was appallingly bad. I mean, it was, and I felt so for this woman, a middle-aged Scottish woman, head and shoulders, no pun intended, above. You know, and this guy, and I commented. I said, look, if that had been a 60-year-old straight white male that had produced that painting, he would have been laughed at. He wouldn't even got past the first round. So it's so prejudiced, and yet the irony is they think they probably don't, but you know, they present themselves as being you know, we're the prejudiced ones.
Yeah, and again, it's calculated, it's deliberate that everything's pushed this way. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to tell anyone anymore. The judges, the people involved with running that competition, they don't need to be given an instruction on whatever you do. Make sure it's a queer person, make sure it's not a white person, make sure it's not a middle-aged person. They just know now. That's just, you don't do that. It's almost subconscious for these people at this point.
Yeah, I did wonder. I was telling my son about it in the car coming up, and I said, I don't actually know at what point that decision was made. Clearly, the judges made that decision. They know it was a crap painting compared to this. So have they been told from... I would guess they actually had been told, because I think left to their own devices, they actually would have just picked the better painting. So on that level, and I tend to be one who isn't overly paranoid about these things or overly conspiratorial, but I think in that case it would have been a higher up decision to say, this guy's going to get it. We need this guy to get it.
There are ways of selling these ideas to people without it seeming too sinister. Like if someone had just said, listen, I know this woman is by far the best person, but we're going to get a lot more media attention if we give it to this guy for this picture, or whatever it is.
Less cynical appearing would be, but this is about promoting diversity, and we need to include these people. So, you know, we had a middle-aged woman win it last year, and now we just need to, you know, and you can imagine that that's a sell, isn't it? You know, that's an easier sell. You know, it's less cynical.
Well, it's amazing though, isn't it? Because you go from obviously the whole problem with the trans identity nonsense is that it's promoting the idea that is not only the most significant thing about your character, it's the only thing that matters. It's the thing that makes you valued, it's the thing that makes you brave. It's just being whoever you think you are on a given day is entirely sums up the stake you have in the world and what you have to offer.
And the same with critical race.
You then kind of go from that to, here's something that you're actually really, really shit at, but because you have this specific identity, we're going to pretend you're great at this, at the thing. You're not even rubbish at that thing. It's really discombobulating for people. And again, the people watching it, the people who are following the competition, most of them end up feeling confused because they think, they look at it and they think, but that's not the best portrait. But this guy, we're being told that it is the best portrait. And it's been done by this person who has this label. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't understand what's beautiful anymore, or what I like.
There's that, or, and I think this is perhaps more common. People, they don't voice it, but they are actually angry inside. And I think this is an interesting point with this whole, for all of us who are aware of what's going on, is again, it's another, like a double bluff almost. I think they don't care. As long as we're angry, and then this pendulum swings backwards and forwards.
Yes.
And this is where, you know, the whole Trump Musk thing, this pendulum swinging. They're quite happy for us to get outraged about the ridiculous woke crap, and I think probably 90% of the general population do see through it, although they're perhaps intimidated to not speak out. But
I mean, I would say one of my ideas is that probably for the last few years that all this woke trans stuff has been overly promoted and overly pushed and gone so ridiculously far.
Yeah.
Partly on purpose.
Yeah.
So that heroic Trump and Musk can come in,
I think you're right,
and just tell people are so desperate, they're so fed up with it, they just say, we're going to get rid of all this.
Yeah.
People are so happy that they almost ignore anything else that they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And they must be good guys.
I'll be honest,
they're getting rid of that
I
stuff.
felt some relief when Kamala didn't get in. I mean,
everybody felt relief,
I'll be
Jake,
honest,
because no one wanted to listen to that cackle. For 4 years. That was, and again, it's brilliantly kind of created character, Kamala. Like, let's just put forward the most irritating woman anyone could ever think of. So just please, anything but having to listen to her for another moment. That's obviously there's relief. I mean, but I was still surprised at the jubilation. I kind of thought, especially over here. I get that in America as a whole, as a different movement.
Was it? You talked about someone dancing on a. I think I saw the same.
Yeah. I don't want to say who it is.
No,
because I like this person.
Yes.
And this was not the only person. There were several.
Yeah, totally. And I respect her a lot. I assume it's the same person. Her posts, and she's a warrior. But it was really over the top, and in a way, at that point, I hadn't really thought about it too much. I was still, because a lot of this stuff now, I half the time I don't engage with it too much, and I hadn't perhaps really gone as far as I should have thinking about actually what, the Trump Musk agenda is, and part of me was still thinking, oh yeah, Vance actually, he just sound like a reason, like there's part of me just thinking, actually, hopefully, maybe. And I think, as Robin Minotti said, he said...
I love Robin, he's great.
Yeah, he said it's not about Trump, it's about the fact that people didn't vote for... it's about the people who voted for Trump. It's not about Trump, it's about... And to some extent, there's truth to that, but I say, really, ultimately, it's this pendulum swing that we need to watch, so... It's,
for me, it's the long game. Of how they come after the rest of us now. And I think that these characters have always been in play for that reason. And it's a lot cleverer and it's a lot more subtle. Because whoever put this thing together, and I do think there is a group somewhere who designed this whole thing, who it is planned and there is an end goal. And it is extremely clever the way it's played out. I just don't think it's possible to look at those 3 or 4 years between the announcement of a pandemic and where we are now, and not see it as an incredibly clever, competent, well-executed plan at a high level, not at the level of our politicians, or even maybe above them, but clearly there's an element of design to all this, and I think from a psychological point of view, it was understood way before any of it kicked off that there is going to be this large proportion of people who won't fall for it, who won't go along with it, who are going to be opposed to it. And we'd leave them for now, because that's going to be harder. And the people we know are going to be easy, that will be captured in the first couple of years, are, basically left-leaning, woke, Democrat voting people obsessed with political correctness and who are going to just want to virtue signal and do whatever we say. And that was the thing about those videos of people crying about Trump's win. You look at these videos, they've got these people now. They don't need to worry about any of them anymore. They are sadly lost. And obviously this is the part where they start to try and come after the rest of us. In other words, sell us the ideas that we have been thinking we're opposed to for the last few years. If we can get the right people to sell these things, if we can elevate these characters in the minds of the public, as in the public who think of themselves as awake as being so heroic, so wedded to freedom of speech, anti-woke, and so much outside the system, enemies of the deep state or whatever you want to call it. They're going to be so trusted that eventually you can sell them their digital IDs, you can sell them their digital control grid, their electric cars, and eventually their jabs that you tell them are safe or whatever it is, because there'll be so much trust. I do really think that's what's going on here. We have
it might
to
be
really
the plan. I think it's a flawed plan, if that is the plan.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it will work, but I do think that's what they're maybe hoping will happen.
Yeah.
In uncertain times, one asset continues to rise, and that's gold. More than just a precious metal, gold is a globally recognized Tier 1 asset with no counterparty risk. Its history of preserving value during turbulent periods makes it a trusted store of wealth, and with central banks and nation-states buying record vaults, it's clear gold is more than an investment, it's financial security. Secure yours today with Knights Bullion. Visit knightsbullion.com or call 01789 266 595.
But yeah, going back to this sort of destruction of beauty and, I suppose, talent. Because I was so focused on what I wanted to end up doing. It was very specific. I knew I wanted to work for a newspaper doing political cartoons. But then I'd come to that through really trying to be accurate and really improve my skill set as a draftsman, and trying to learn about composition, perspective, all this stuff. And my course was fine. University wasn't too bad, but I went to do a foundation course because you have to before you apply to a degree. And I didn't really put much thought into it. I just went to the local polytechnic to do this foundation course. And that was really heavily focused on conceptual stuff.
Okay.
And again, basically Marxist thinking. And we immediately started having these lectures about, how do we know this chair is even real?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What makes it a chair? What's the point in painting the chair?
Why
would you try and paint the chair as the chair looks? Paint how the chair makes you feel. Or paint the room without the chair, or the room without the chair, and then write an essay about what that means. Or whatever. I think I did. I was immediately, not having any of this and thinking, why the hell am I here? I've made a mistake. And I think I said, well, one of the reasons not to paint the chair is it's an ugly chair. Find a chair that's been beautifully crafted, and maybe they didn't really seem to get the point of that. But they didn't like me from the beginning, partly because I just wanted to learn how to draw and paint, and because I had a fixed idea that not only of the type of illustration I wanted to do, but also that it was political, and that I hoped to make money from it. That was the worst thing. If you actually said, well, I would like this to be my career, not necessarily because I want to make loads of money, it's because I want to do it full time, because I love it. And so I want it to be my job. You were really disgusting if you said anything like that, if you had that attitude. And that carried on a little bit even at university, where anyone who actually really wanted to do it as a job was a bit, what's wrong with you?
So
why do you want that?
Yeah.
My course was better. My course had a really good focus on professionalism. They actually taught us about how to put portfolio together, how to deal with clients. We even had some lectures about filling out a self-assessment tax return and things, which you think like that's useful for anyone. Not Now,
Not
obviously,
now.
I have a completely different
Now,
idea
obviously.
about, paying tax to fund genocide or whatever. But at that time, it was very useful. So there's definitely this war against the pursuit of beauty, tradition, and having something of value to say. I mean, that I'm still uncomfortable calling myself an artist. I don't know if you call yourself an artist. It was
I tend to
always
call
a weird
myself a painter, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I similar sort of feel slightly uncomfortable with it.
I was always really fine with just being a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And then obviously once I started opposing what was going on, I get, you're just a cartoonist. Don't listen to you.
Yeah.
You're a cartoonist.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I thought, oh, that's funny. Maybe I don't like the label anymore. And then I suppose I guess as I've become more widely known and I've started to do other types of images that are not categorized as cartoons all the time. And some people say I'm an artist. And that was quite weird at first. I thought, I'm not an artist, And I thought, well, what is the difference? At what point do you become an artist? I think it's just partly, regardless of what medium you're working in or what your style is, it's having something to say. It's working out why you're creating the images you are.
Yeah.
Because you have a specific set of values, a theme that is a theme that runs throughout everything you do. In that sense, I think, okay, maybe I'm an artist in that way now, whereas I wasn't before. And you can't. It's about being independent as well, because all your work is your own. It's not coming from anyone else. There's no other influence.
Yeah.
It's not an editor who steered you a particular way. It's not being commissioned. I very rarely do any commissions now. If I do, it has to be for the right people, and there's got to be enough freedom for me to do what I want to. It'll be basically for people on our side, and I support what they're doing.
Yeah.
But generally, everything I do is my own, which is obviously really freeing creatively, but it's also an entirely different responsibility, because you have to own it if you do it. You have to really think, do I agree with this? Do I believe in it? Is it the right time to put it out? Are my followers going to disagree with it? A lot of the time now, I think, loads of them won't like this. And then I have to tell myself, that's not a reason to not do it. In fact, it's really important that you do this. If you think it's the right thing that needs saying, you've got to be prepared to lose followers and get pushback and have people say, oh, I liked everything else you do, but I don't agree with this.
Yeah.
That's good. That's exactly what we're missing. That's what we need, people prepared to do that.
I think this is a real key point I'd like to sort of expand on a little bit. Because I noticed that I obviously follow you on Instagram and I think Facebook as well. And, you post in the Trump stuff and bang, it's maybe even 50-50 seem to be just like, I used to like you, but you're wrong on this. Yeah, you're wrong on this, and best of a bad bunch or whatever.
But, it's interesting because I'm thinking, if I wasn't aware of how many of you feel this way about Trump, I'd never have drawn the picture in the first place. It's only because I know that you all think he's great and you're all kind of so happy. That's what motivated me to do this image.
Yeah.
I'm trying to show you, here's the way you should look at him.
Yeah.
So obviously I know they're going to be upset.
Yeah.
And I have to be willing to upset people, not just the characters that we see as the enemy or who are imposing this stuff on us, but our own side.
Totally. And I mean, I've had like a small sort of taste of that. I like to bring up flat Earth as a kind of, not because I'm like want to debate whether it's flat or round, but I think it's such a good indicator of, it says a lot about where we're at as a community, how people can debate with each other, how they can talk to each other when they disagree.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'm constantly disappointed, and frustrated at not people's what I see. Or I mean, I'll be straight. I don't think the Earth is flat, but it's not that I think people are stupid who think the Earth is flat. Far from it. I've got lots of
I
friends.
agree. That's exactly where I am. I think I would agree with that. Yeah.
But and one-to-one, I can talk about it usually with most of my friends or people that I meet and have a nice conversation, because you just, how you are as a person when you're interacting with someone.
Yeah.
You tend to sort of just, and you can gauge where people are at. But online, it just tends to disintegrate so quickly into, you're a NASA shill. I bet you sound vaxxed, and you're not a proper truther because you don't think the Earth is flat,
Yeah.
And what's really important, perhaps my biggest thing, like with this whole sort of portrait thing and talking to people, if I'd like to get anything across is let's learn to debate. Let's learn to be real truthers, so that whatever we believe, we are just focused on trying to find the truth, and we're not attached emotionally. Because really, I just see a fair bunch of the people within the movement are really psychologically no different from the people who are following the mainstream.
That's very true.
They've found a new belief system.
Well, and I've particularly sort of picked up on that with this Trump thing.
Yeah.
As I started to get the angry pushback.
Yeah.
It was a bit disturbing, because the way people were having a go at me about my stance on Trump was so reflective of the kind of responses I would get from people who wanted more lockdowns, people who wanted you wearing a mask. It was that same sort of just bizarre, hysterical anger.
Yeah.
And not really interested in engaging and calling you names or whatever. I thought, this is worrying, because most of you guys have just had to spend 3 years dealing on the receiving end of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're doing it.
You're dishing it out.
And I think there is an element, probably there's a psychological thing. We were talking about this beforehand, about how traumatic it's been for those people who've had to live through the last few years knowing how wrong it is, trying to alert others, getting nothing but abuse, or being cancelled or being fired or whatever it is, losing friends, losing family, feeling like they're so alone, desperately trying to stop people getting jabbed and then having to watch them get ill or die. That's a hugely traumatic thing to go through, and it's taken its toll on everyone. I don't think, if I didn't have my cartooning, my art as an outlet, I don't think I'd have coped nearly as well as I have. But so that's a cathartic thing for me to be able to do, and a therapeutic thing. But I wonder whether, on a psychological level, if you're forced to live around people who've just gone completely bonkers about something and they won't listen to you, and as a result you've suffered a huge trauma, in some way, when you are then presented with an opportunity on a kind of subliminal level or subconscious level, hey, you can just go mad too now if you want. Wouldn't that be easier? I think your brain sort of goes, do you know what? I'm just going to go a bit nuts as well.
Yeah. I'm going
to become irrational over something else because I just can't cope. I don't want to be in this situation anymore where everyone's mad and I'm the only sane person.
Isn't it like when you have an argument, say with your partner or a friend or something, and you quickly descend into sort of childhood. You start exaggerating and you're making stuff up. Yeah. And you probably deep down know this isn't. I don't really believe this. But I'm just going to throw out there. And I think that's almost how people get within the movement, is they so quickly go down every sort of rabbit hole because it's almost like a fingers up to the normies. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think that's quite healthy, as in, you can talk about different conspiracy theories, But a lot of it is sort of sometimes tongue-in-cheek, sometimes it's just because it's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, so for example, if you take something specific like, is Michelle Obama a man?
Yeah.
People say to me, do you really think that she has a penis? Because obviously I've put her in my picture with a rather large...
Schlong.
Yeah. And I say, well, not necessarily. I haven't put that in there because I'm telling people this is the absolute truth. I'm 100% sure that it's Big Mike. First of all, it's just funny. It's funny because it's an in-joke for us. It's funny because people who are outside our group, our movement, or whatever, have no idea why on earth have you drawn that, which I love.
Yeah.
Everyone who's gone down any rabbit holes knows exactly why it's there. So there's that. It's funny, it's shocking. But also, these people, and the Obamas in particular, really support that ideology. They endorse the whole trans movement, all the woke stuff. So aside from anything else, it's just a visual way of representing that.
Yeah.
And the idea that I imagine they might not... Michelle Obama might not want to be depicted in that way. I'm not sure, maybe he doesn't mind. It's quite flattering, I suppose. But anyway, it's not always a statement of, I'm trying to give you the truth with this picture.
No.
There's more to it than that. I think I wrote a long thing on Twitter yesterday that some people might have seen, I don't know, in response to this slight argument that had sprung up between David Icke and Neil Oliver.
Oh,
a really interesting point of contention. This sort of
I am not
kind of
aware
applies to what we're talking about here, I suppose. Where, there's obviously this whole idea about lab leak and, gain of function.
Yeah.
And, they released the virus. America was involved in making this virus.
You don't think there was a virus, do you? You shill.
So, and I think Neil Oliver had said something about, listen, this is all a red herring. It's take no notice of this. It doesn't matter, because what matters is, regardless of all that, what they did was wrong and nothing can change that. Which is what I was saying earlier about, that's where I started. That's how I began to go on this path. And then David Icke had got irritated about this and basically said, of course it matters. Of course, there wasn't a virus. There was no pandemic. He's right. There was absolutely no pandemic, and probably very likely no such thing as COVID, no novel virus traveling about. You don't even need to get to viruses might not exist at all. It definitely wasn't a pandemic. There was no emergency. Nothing really changed. And that matters because he said without that lie, they'd never have been able to do any of it. And I think this is really interesting because there is this contention between what is the truth and how much are we just focused on telling people what's true. You've been lied to, this is what really happened. And how much do we want to focus on, regardless of whether there was a pandemic, regardless of whether any of that was real, it wasn't right.
Yeah.
It was wrong, which is separate.
Yeah.
And it's not reliant on, understanding that it was all wrong did not rely on you knowing it was a lie, knowing there was no virus, there was no pandemic, there's no emergency. It's not as if I had believed that it was true and millions and billions of people were going to die and this was the deadliest disease anyone had ever thought possible, I would have still arrived at the point of, but this is, they can't do it.
Yeah, you can't.
They can't do this to people. Because we're in tyranny. We're in a tyrannical regime now, and you can't just kill people. You can't allow the state to just start murdering people.
Yeah.
So that's it. And I think it's important maybe to get people to that point first, And it's true of all the stories that they tell us. We're presented with stories. that may be true, they may not be true.
Yeah.
But the thread that runs throughout these stories we're told is because of this story that seems extreme, seems frightening, it seems like an emergency, you have to abandon your moral foundations or invert them. You've got to start doing things that you have always believed to be wrong and that any healthy society believes to be wrong.
Yeah.
But because of this story, all bets are off and you've got to just start doing these or subscribing to these really disgusting ideas. And the opposite should be true. There shouldn't be any story that our moral foundations can't withstand. They have to hold fast against anything that's presented to us. It's the whole point. Otherwise you're lost. Otherwise you're just on a downward spiral. And it doesn't make a difference whether the story is true or not. Now, it's difficult because obviously we all know these stories aren't true, and that is important. It's not that that doesn't matter. It's hugely important to know and to tell other people. But too often, there's this attitude from those on the other side who don't agree with us. You can tell that they think the only reason you're against any of this is because you just don't believe it. You don't believe there was a virus. You don't believe there was a pandemic. You have to say it doesn't make a difference. Yeah. And the fact that you did doesn't make it right. It doesn't excuse what you've done. So that's a difficult thing.
And we don't do ourselves any favours again, because that slight immaturity, I think, and feeling sort of moral indignation at what has happened. Again, a lot of people in the movement don't really know how to actually conduct themselves, either online or with friends. So they get drawn into the detail, and they often don't know the detail, and they'll make themselves look rather silly in a way, and then they get dismissed, and it's this sort of whole messy. And I think this is probably what I think is more important than anything discussing is where we go in terms of how we, because it is a movement, I suppose. It's a bunch of people who came together primarily because they believe in sovereignty. Yeah. Bottom line, you can believe that the Earth's flat, the virus, chemtrails, whatever you want to believe. What brought us together was the fact that we weren't going to be told what to do. And like you said, exactly that point, that, what's fundamental is not whether it was a lab leak or whether it was this, that, and the other. It's, has any government got the right to lock you in your home and all the added, issues around that, Yeah. And that's why I like Larkin Rose. I don't know if you know Larkin Rose.
Oh, yes.
I just really like where he's coming from. He just seems no bullshit, and he just gets down to the real issue, which is sovereignty, essentially. And I mean, anarchy has been given a bad rap. That word anarchy, we sort of knee-jerk reaction. It just means crazy, wild, or Sid Vicious or something, or people just spitting on it.
Absolute mayhem. A society with no rules, but also no values.
No values.
Where everyone is just an animal running around smashing stuff up, which
that's what
is
people think of
a totally false idea of what anarchy means.
Yeah.
It can be a very, really quite ordered society with a lot of morality and values and structure. There's just no government at the top of it.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
That's all it is, yeah.
That's all it means. And I'm sort of closer and closer to thinking that is probably where we should try to get to, but I'm not naive about it. It's not something you can turn off overnight. You can't get rid of the system overnight. And
I don't think there's any question it's where we need to get to.
But before we even attempt to make it happen, we need so many more people with sort of elevated consciousness and awareness to understand that would be a good thing, and that's where we should try to get to.
Yeah, but I would sort of phrase it slightly differently. I would say it just won't happen until...
Well, yeah. It won't.
So it's not like we need to wait for it. It's not. I don't think it's a numbers game in that sense. It's well, it sort of is to some extent. It's just it's a personal, individual journey, isn't it, towards that point where you realise that you are sovereign, and that no one can tell you what to do. No one has authority over you. And when enough people realise that, it will automatically, society will fundamentally change. But I don't know how that's going to come about, other than each individual. That's why for me it's more important for us to talk about how we are as people, and how we discuss and how we talk about these things that are contentious and maybe divisive. It's more important to just, it's like a school, learn how to communicate, how to be, more than, is it the Jesuits? Is it the Vatican? All this kind of thing. It really doesn't matter. It's how we are as people.
Well, all that stuff is interesting.
Yeah.
And you often think within our group, our movement, we're always having chats about that stuff.
Of course.
We're really interested, we're sharing information, we're speculating, and it's the big problem, because it's very hard for us to explain ourselves, point things out without talking about they.
Yeah.
And they go, well, who's they?
Yep.
And you don't have a concrete answer other than saying there is a they.
Yeah.
And I can give you a few different ideas of who they might be, but I don't actually know. And then you say, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
No one knows. That's why too often people who are trying to reach outside to the people who have no idea, or the people who are still going along with stuff, who are blissfully unaware, they focus too much on that. They kind of immediately try and bombard people with, this is who runs the world. Yeah. This is how long it's been run for. And look at it, and this is, which is not the right approach. You always have to begin. You have to sort of start someone off with where you started, which is just an inkling that something's not right, something doesn't make sense. Yeah. Then this is not moral, this is not legal, this is not democratic. Yeah. This, if we set these precedents, anything could be possible in the future. Yeah. And then, because for me it was, why isn't this stopping? And where is it going? You kind of see an inevitable endpoint. This can only end up in one place, and it's really not good at all. It's going to be. And I refuse to believe that nobody in any government anywhere who's doing this stuff can't see what I can see as an end destination. And then, of course, you do start to then look at the quote-unquote conspiracy theories. With people saying, look, these people have been saying they want to do this for years and years, or they've been, saying they want to do it with the pandemic, and they're going to do this with vaccines, and they're going to look at how they tried it this year and it didn't work, and as soon as you begin to look at it from that perspective, you realise this all makes so much more sense if it's planned, and if the end goal that I'm so horrified by is exactly where they're trying to get us to. That does make sense. Yeah. But again, the problem was not so much that people were lied to and they believed the lies. It's that they already were in a society and had a mindset about themselves that allowed them to abandon these fundamental values in the first place. And once you've got people to that point and you've made them get rid of those values and that sense of sovereignty, what then happens is, so you can do it with a lie, you can do it with a false narrative. It doesn't matter whether real stories then come along. They're going to apply the same bad ideas to any story, real or false, which is, I think, what's happened now. I mean, it's the same. You see the same thing with Israel-Gaza. It's the same thing happening there, where, again, if you say you have any problem at all with what's going on, and the way Netanyahu has responded, it's immediately, so you think October 7th didn't happen, you think it was a hoax. It doesn't make any difference. It makes no difference at all to whether what's been happening since in Gaza is right. You could have it much worse. you could have all the terrorists and paragliders you want, and you could have them killing 100,000 people and beheading them, or like whatever story you want. It can all be true, and it can all be worse than what you think is true, because nothing at all ever justifies what is being done.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. Yeah. It was the same. And it's the same as what happened with the pandemic and stuff. Again, people are presented with a story. They're made to invest in this story, and they're having to subscribe to these really disgusting ideologies. And you know, people will say, well, it's not, they go, well, it's not true. Again, some people will say, it's not actually true. You know, they're not killing any civilians in Gaza. Or, you know, the IDF is actually helping them.
Yeah.
Whatever. I think, okay, that's what you think. But again, you're still back to this problem of lots and lots of people in the world do believe that they're killing thousands and thousands of children and babies as a hostage rescue strategy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And those people are okay with it. So whether it's actually happening or not, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Because we can't have this many people thinking that that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the whole story thing is interesting. I suppose maybe part of the reason I've gone the way I have and why I picked up on it at the beginning and needed to oppose it is that understanding of narrative. I mean, I think this is something else that lots of people have lost, that everybody used to have. I've always had a pretty good understanding of how narrative works, and I suppose, in a sense, I'm contributing, you know, as a newspaper cartoonist, I was contributing to a narrative.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing thing. You know, every single day there's another little chapter of the story. You understand how to bring characters in, how to develop characters, what to leave out, how to pace things. You know, and one of my favourite things was always doing a strip. You know, you could kind of sometimes get away with doing like a 6-cell little comic strip in the cartoon space.
Yeah.
Which is so telling a little story. But we all used to be storytellers. It's all we had. You know, at one point, all we had was a campfire and stories.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's how we taught. It's how we recorded our history. It's how we conserved our traditions.
Yeah.
And most people had to be really good at telling a story, which means you understand narrative. And what they've cleverly done is made most people just consumers of narrative. And if you consume narrative, you might understand what you enjoy, you might understand what you like, but you don't really understand why you enjoy it. You don't understand how it works.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of try and get back is people understanding stories, because they are using stories to manipulate us all the time. We went really off, it doesn't really matter, my career at the Telegraph, and then losing my job and things.
Yeah.
But that's probably good. I lost my job at the end of 2021, basically. And then I spent a year working with a charity in Canada who basically let me do what I wanted, but I had to produce 3 cartoons a week. That was really good, because partly because I just needed to get all this stuff out of my system. And that lasted a year, and then we sort of parted ways amicably, because they were a charity, and I got to a point where I didn't necessarily need them to pay me anymore, and I wanted to be fully independent by then. I thought what I need to do now is just be entirely on my own, and that meant I can kind of choose how many cartoons I do, when I want to draw and what I draw, and spend longer doing, so that's when I started
Yeah.
doing some bigger pieces, a lot more detailed, which I've really enjoyed doing. And then I did my show, my live show, that I sort of basically spent last year putting together, which was a really wild change for me, not something I ever expected I'd be doing.
Playing guitar and
well, there was that. There was, but
that's a bit because I was watching it while I was painting, so I wasn't watching. I was.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't. I was listening basically.
Yeah.
So, and then I wondered if it was you playing guitar or piano or drum. I'd seen a picture of you playing. Do you play drums as well? Or were you just sitting, behind there?
I mess about on the drums.
Yeah.
That was just, I think there's a shot of me at the start.
That's right,
in the sound check, mucking around. On
Yeah,
the drums. I used to be in bands when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I played guitar and was a singer. And when we just did covers, we did like weddings and parties and stuff like that.
Okay.
It was great fun. And so basically there was a bunch of guys I was at school with and we'd had bands at school, and then at a certain point in our early 20s we all ended up living kind of back home for a bit, before our careers got started. Mm-hmm. So we reformed the band and I used to really enjoy doing that. I never thought about doing it seriously, It's just good fun.
Yeah.
And then I very much put that behind me. But unfortunately, when we were rehearsing for the first two shows, I was not playing guitar. And then when we finally managed to get a venue to do it for a third time in Camden at Dingwalls, we sort of decided we needed to change it up a bit, make a few alterations, make it snappier and make it somehow a bit more grungy to fit with the venue. We were doing a music rehearsal one day and I picked up a guitar in one of the breaks and played something, and they all kind of stopped and went, "We didn't know you played the guitar," and I immediately regretted it and said, "No, I don't, don't forget about that." And he said, "You've got to play the guitar in the show, it'd be really great." So I agreed. Then they said, "Yeah, you've got to play a really great solo in this piece of music." And I sort of said, I never played lead guitar, I only played rhythm guitar and song. And they said, "Well, you've got to work out a solo you can do." But then to make it work, we had to do it. It couldn't come across like I was seriously trying to say, "Hey, look everyone, I play the guitar as well." So we tried to set it up so it looks spontaneous. So it's during the Canadian truckers thing, the point of which is everyone got a bit carried away with that.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to be getting carried away and I pick up the guitar and start playing. But I loved, my favourite part of doing that show was we had these music rehearsals in Hackney, in these rehearsal rooms at the Premises Studios, which is quite a famous sort of studio. There'd always be a few famous musicians there. And so we'd spend a day just rehearsing the music bits and then just jamming, because obviously I was really lucky with the show. I had Paul Handley, who's this amazing composer, got in touch and said, "Do you want me to create some original music?" I said, "Yeah, that would be great." And then that evolved into him saying, "I think we need live musicians on stage with you." Which I thought, okay. So there was Paul, and then he found a drummer and a bass guitar player. So you got these three professional musicians, and then so suddenly we're doing these rehearsals, and I'm jamming with these proper musicians.
Yeah.
So it was so fun because I'd start playing something that we used to do in the band, that would always go wrong, and you'd always be getting cross with the drummer or something. No, there's another verse there, you idiot. These guys just know everything. They just start playing it straight away, and it's perfect. And we had great fun doing that. And it was. I think it was good doing the show. I sort of stopped producing cartoons. I didn't actually produce that many while I was working on that.
Oh, okay.
And I think at that point, it was really useful to stop and look back and really reflect on where I'd come from, how my thinking had shifted, how my sort of style had developed, which ones people really liked, which ones didn't do so well, which ones I thought were going to be great and didn't people didn't like. That happens quite a lot. You know, sometimes I'll do one and I'll think, this is going to really, they're going to love this, and they're going to go, and it gets sort of, doesn't do so well. And then other days you think, oh, this is a bit of a throwaway one. I don't think this is my best thing.
Yeah.
And people absolutely love it.
Yeah,
You know,
it's true,
you can't always tell.
Is your wife your harshest critic? Or is she pretty?
Not really. My wife doesn't actually very often comment on them. I think because she likes to just leave me to get on with it. And she doesn't really like the grotesque, explicit ones.
Oh, okay.
She does like the more upbeat ones. I do.
Yeah.
She will often say, you know, isn't it time you did another one that's a bit more positive?
More positive, yeah.
But I think she can also tell that I go through periods where I'm really focused on the evil doing it and the dark stuff, and you have to have a break from that because you can get too immersed in it all and it starts to take its toll.
Yeah.
So I kind of, at certain points, I would say I'm going to do something that's just joyful and happy and positive before I go back to painting Bill Gates or Charles or whoever it is.
Yeah.
Like the other day, I did one for the farmers, you know, about just celebrating farming basically and family farms, and it was just a really pretty picture. That was exactly what I needed to do at that point.
Yeah.
They don't care. They almost, again, explicitly told us, you know the law? We don't care about that anymore. We're all going to break it. In fact, all these people who've broken the law, we're then going to make you sit and watch them get knighted. But if you come along to a news conference and you ask a question we don't like, we're just not going to invite you to the next one. And then you're screwed. They hold stuff back all the time, and they know. It's not like these people at the newspapers don't know.
We're making signed prints available of all the paintings in the 1,000 Word series. If you'd like to own one, go to jakefern.com or click on the link in the description.